In February of 2018, piercing screams could be heard outside a church in South Carolina. A 20-year-old woman had just ripped out her own eyes. Shocked bystanders, some noticing an eyeball in one of the girl's hands, called 911. Later, the local sheriff would say, "Most of our deputies have never seen anything like that." It goes without saying that this is something you don't see every day. But as you'll see in this show, gouging out one's own eyes does happen, and there's even a term for it. As for the woman in this case, she was mentally unhinged after illegal substance abuse. At the time of her grievous self-harm, she believed she had to make a sacrifice. Sometime later, the now blind woman told Cosmopolitan, "I thought everything would end abruptly and everyone would die if I didn't tear my eyes out immediately." That woman eventually was treated at a psychiatric inpatient treatment facility. She was put on mood stabilizers, antipsychotic medication, and was told she had severe bipolar disorder. She had to learn to live again, this time by navigating the world without her sense of sight. She said in an interview, "Activities I used to enjoy, like playing guitar and learning piano, are going to be harder now that I'm blind, but I'm still optimistic. When I stub my toe or my knee, I think, well, it probably saved me from walking into a wall and hitting my face." Statistics differ, but it's thought that in the USA, around 1 in 4 teenage girls self-harm in some way. It's said fewer males engage in self-mutilation, but around 1 in 7 have done it. This kind of behavior usually starts in the early teens for both sexes, and sometimes carries on into the person's 20s. The cases are not usually as extreme as the girl we just talked about, but a lot of people will hurt themselves in some way when they're young, with the reason for doing such a thing often being an underlying mental disorder, or perhaps a coping mechanism for trauma. That trauma is often related to physical abuse. You'll often hear people sometimes called cutters, saying that the act of self-mutilation brings some kind of peace to them. What's also interesting is that animals in cages have been known to self-harm, and within the prison population it's also quite common, especially during stints of solitary confinement. So we know that self-harming is hardly unusual, and we would hope that if you feel like doing it, don't do it and talk to someone first. Some kids in school just scratch themselves, others slice themselves with knives, but not so deep the cuts require a hospital visit. Some others may even pull out their own hair, something known as trichotillomania. But pulling out your own eyes, blinding yourself to the world you know, to intentionally disable yourself like that, preventing you from ever seeing faces again or a rainbow slowly emerging after a rain shower. This is perhaps the worst form of self-mutilation there is. Yes, people have been known to amputate their own healthy limbs, known as body integrity identity disorder. People also take their own lives, but to disable one's vision is so extreme, it's something most people just cannot fathom. We went to the U.S. National Institutes of Health to better understand such a condition. It presented us with a case of attempted bilateral self-enucleation. That's the term used for gouging out your own eyes, what NIH called a rare but devastating form of self-mutilation behavior. In this case, a 52-year-old man had tried to rip out his eyes in his bedroom and then called his son into the room at some point. We can only imagine what trauma this caused to the son. The man later said he had been instructed by God to remove his eyes, and that it was what he had to do to cleanse himself of his sins. NIH wrote, the patient was transferred to the ER by ambulance and appeared calm. The Sun reports that the patient has been acting strange and displayed decreased appetite and increased wakefulness. It said he was calm on the way to the hospital and appeared well-groomed and well-dressed. It's also said he had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder a number of years before this event and had at least one time attempted to take his own life. While still calm in the hospital, he declared, "I do not feel any pain or remorse. I feel I've done the right thing. It was what I was supposed to do and I am cleansed now." We've seen the picture of the damage he caused himself and it's not a pleasant sight. The man underwent many surgeries, but he had caused irreparable damage. It took weeks before he finally admitted he felt some regret for what he had done. NIH tells us that there have been cases of people who have attempted self-enucleation, had their hacked-at eyes surgically fixed, and then later tried again. While rare, it happens more than we would think. Mental issues are of course to blame, because what entirely sane person would attempt to remove their own eyes? That's how the experts see it. While self-harming in less extreme ways might not be related to a profound mental illness, self-enucleation is. As we said, some of these patients relate their need to eye gouge to God. NIH tells us that some patients who have done this have been known to quote the New Testament in the book of Matthew 5:29. "If thy right eye causeth thee to stumble, pluck it out and cast it from thee." We are quite sure this is where Bill the Butcher's line came from in the Martin Scorsese movie Gangs of New York. That didn't happen in real life though, and the real Bill the Butcher was just beaten so badly he lost an eye. We digress somewhat, but just want to show you argue that most rational-thinking people would not remove their own eye or eyes. Medical statistics tell us that 50% of people that engage in self-enucleation do so because they believe they were acting on the orders of God. Medical experts, however, believe this form of piety or religious fervor is an extreme delusion caused by an underlying mental illness. NIH writes in a recent review of 60 cases of complete and 9 cases of attempted self-enucleation, 43% of the cases were associated with schizophrenia, 25% were drug-induced, and only 4% were associated with bipolar disorder. Religion was the excuse in many cases, but the reality, in crude terms, was a messed up mind. Other disorders associated with self-eye gouging, but not so common, are obsessive-compulsive disorder, depression, mental retardation, neurosyphilis, Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, and structural brain lesions. But there is another reason why people might do this, and it's simply guilt. Guilt with an underlying mental disorder. The experts say that this might not always be religious guilt, though, and it might just be to relieve themselves of a perceived burden in the worst possible way. Medical experts have invoked the mythical Greek king Oedipus. It's written that when he came to terms with the fact that he had killed his own father and married his mother, in a moment of extreme anguish, he decided to expiate his wrongdoing by ripping out his own eyes. Researchers writing in the British Journal of Ophthalmology found that around a quarter of people around the world that self-enucleated were not Christian and had not likely heard of the Greek myth we just mentioned. They were, however, trying to atone for something they had done. They felt guilty. They were also extremely delusional, sometimes hearing voices telling them that their eyes were dangerous, that they needed to go. The researchers wrote, "Each case is disturbing, and it's perhaps not surprising that doctors have sought to explain the patient's behavior in the secure frameworks of their religious and cultural beliefs. They said it's not always the case, and guilt with mental illness can be the cause. It could happen anywhere, in any culture, and as we said, it might just be someone feeling guilty and being mentally unwell in the extreme." In terms of recent cases, we might look to an Iranian man whose psychosis was triggered by marijuana use. When he was taken to a hospital, he told doctors that he just had a bad headache after taking a lot of the plant, so he had rubbed his eye. The eye, he said, accidentally came out. But more was revealed when speaking to this man, because he then revealed to doctors that he believed his father was not actually his father, that his family were out to get him, and that he had been poisoned. He also believed that a foreign country was building a bomb to destroy him and his nation. The devil, he said, was behind this. He was psychotic. This was published in a journal in 2014, and while it's sometimes said there have been 50 cases worldwide, that journal cites a study in which 50 people had attempted to damage their eyes. So while few people might not have actually taken out their eyes and gone blind, in light of this study, we can assume more people purposefully damaged their eyes but not actually removed them. Indeed, we found another journal which one person wrote that self-inflicted eye injuries in psychotic patients are not as uncommon as first thought. He said that this often goes undiagnosed or unreported in various parts of the world. In this journal, a 42-year-old man was discussed. He had not managed to take out his eyes, but he had caused considerable damage to the eye area. He required quite a bit of care to fix what he had done. As for why he did it, well, he had heard voices like the others we've mentioned in the show. The journal tells us the patient started hearing commands about his eyes being not worthy and should be punished by injuring them. So the idea of his wife being unfaithful to him is one of the reasons for self-enucleation, which can be attributed to a schizophrenic condition. That same journal again says people damaging their eyes rather than completely enucleating the eyes is more common than we think. If you go to the Wikipedia page for self-enucleation, it's a very short one to read. The 50 cases are mentioned, yet there is a reference to 2 journals telling us that cases often go unreported. We tried to find a case in the UK and came up with the story of a woman known as Saint Triuden of Scotland. As the story goes, she was very pious. It said a king of the Picts named Necton had a thing for her because of her beautiful eyes. She then tore them out and presented them to him in a dish. But historians are not even sure when she lived, and state it could be anywhere from the 4th to the 8th century. Perhaps the tale is untrue. What is true, though, is what one doctor working for the Department of Ophthalmology in Bradford, Northern England, wrote in 2004. This was the case of a 48-year-old man who had completely removed both of his eyes. In a journal, there's a horrific photo of each complete eye sitting in 2 dishes. In that journal, it's written he was calm and apparently in no pain. The history was patchy, and his relatives said that he indeed had a very troubled family life. He seemed to have no history of severe mental illness, but had suffered from epileptic fits. He refused medication and wouldn't let doctors look at the now eyeless sockets in his head. His diagnosis was that he was suffering from something called postictal psychosis. This is a type of psychosis that can happen after seizures, and the man had had an epileptic fit before he had done the deed. The man is now blind, of course, and is in psychiatric care. We found another case in 2011 when a British-Italian man ripped out his own eyes at a church service in Italy. 3 years later, a man in Ireland just in his 20s, while on remand in Maghabury prison, took out his own eyes as well as removed his reproductive gland. We found another report in the US about a man who had killed his former wife and 2 children because he said God told him to do it. While in jail, he removed one of his eyes, and later, when on death row, he removed the other and proceeded to eat it. It seems despite his mental illness, he will still be executed. In 2015, there's another report of a man in Arizona who took the life of his wife and then severed his left arm and removed his right eye. It was reported that the man and the woman had a history of mental illness and had even met at a mental health facility. So this is the grim story of taking one's own eyes. A story that goes back to ancient times, but something it seems is still happening around the world today, perhaps with more frequency than has been stated in the past. Can you imagine being so far gone that you do such a thing? Tell us what you think in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other video, Crazy Unexpected Things That Were Found Inside of People. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.